Hello and welcome to the Dragon Shed for the first project of the month. There are 2 Wednesdays in May, so there's going to be another one next week. I have made t-shirts. Last week I put out a video of making a t-shirt pattern from a garment you already own, and I've actually used that pattern to make myself a couple of new t-shirts. Now I'm having some issues with the editing here because for whatever reason I completely forgot to turn my camera onto time-lapse whilst I was doing the sewing. So I've recorded in the region of 5.5–6 hours worth of sewing on the card, which then committed suicide towards the end. So as of yet I don't know exactly how much of the process I've got. I've managed to condense it down to about 15 minutes or thereabouts, so it should be watchable at least. So I'm going to have to talk through all the stages anyway. So I'm wearing one of the t-shirts I've made. So I'll change into the other one for the end. Anyway, so first things first, I had a measuring issue. Anything I make, any fabric I have, I always wash it before I use it, just to get rid of any kind of conditioner on the fabric itself, and to get any shrinkage over before I start. But what I completely forgot to do was to actually do the measuring after I'd washed it. So I did all my measuring before and was happy that I'd had enough fabric to do 2 t-shirts with what I had. Then I washed them and then I didn't have enough fabric. So, but I didn't realise that until I'd cut out the back and front pieces. So you can't hear me swearing, but I was a little upset. Never mind. So I went back into my drawers and pulled out some other fabric to go with this. So I've got some rather plasticky net kind of fabric and some curtain fabric on the white one. Now the net fabric isn't great, it's a little scratchy, so I've had to bind over all the edges and do more than I intended to do, but that's part of the course if you don't think things through. So this stuff, this net stuff, doesn't take marking very well. You can use a big fat marker on it obviously, but then you won't be able to get rid of the line. So what I did was I cut out the pieces I needed from the t-shirt back and front and then used those as templates, which made the whole process a lot easier than I expected. So I don't have an overlocker, which is what you would ideally use with the jersey fabric. So I'm using a standard machine, and I do not have a double needle, which again is something you would ideally use with the jersey fabric. So most, if not all, of my lines of stitching here I'm reinforcing with some just a sheer white or off white coloured ribbon, just to provide some support so that the jersey doesn't deform on its way through the machine. It did a little bit around the collar, but the rest of it is quite good, and I'll come to that later on. So yeah, you can get some iron-on interfacing type stuff and some double-sided tape for use with jersey. So if you can find that stuff, then by all means use it. I didn't. So that meant that every time I sewed this material I had to go over it twice. So I started with usually a zigzag stitch and then a straight stitch down the middle, just to add some support on some pieces anyway. So the first stage of the process is to essentially build your front and back. Because I'm not doing completely jersey, I need to kind of input the net and the lace. So net itself is quite easy to sew. It's just managing the transition between a stretchy jersey and a non-stretchy net. So again, using some tape and lots of pins to make sure everything is really secure as you push it through, and not rushing your machine. There is a temptation to push everything through the machine. Don't do that. Just let it flow, let it do its own thing. The machine on its own won't do curves, it'll naturally take the fabric at its own pace. So if you let it do that, it obviously slows you down, but in slowing down it reduces the risk of puckering and all that kind of thing. So yeah, this, if I'd have just done one t-shirt out of straight jersey without any kind of added help, it would have been 4 or 5 hours of hell anyway. and it would have come out really wonky and it wouldn't look great. Trust me, I've done that before. So just using a cheap bit of ribbon is enough to provide that kind of backing and support. So just be careful on your foot, don't press too much, and it will slow you down, but you'll get a decent finish in the end. So my red shirt, the ribbon is actually elasticated, so that kind of reduces the issues, but there's still that kind of transition between non-elasticated and elasticated. So the only part of my shirt that is elasticated is the main jersey, and for whatever reason the ribbon hasn't ended up on those parts. So I've got ribbon around the sleeves and across the front and back. So in both situations it needs to be stable, so not stretchy. So again, reinforced with tape, so that's a better look. I didn't have enough of that lace to do a bottom trim, so I've just done a line of zigzags without any kind of support along the bottom, which adds a little bit of texture to it. It's a somewhat neat edge, but over time that's going to pull out slightly and leave quite a neat border. So it's a cheat, so I don't have to do any kind of turning up and creating a seam, but it works. It gives it a nice finish. The white one was almost more difficult because the white jersey, for whatever reason, even though it came from the same batch in the same shop, was more flexible, has more bounce to it, so it did fight me quite a bit more, which I kind of should have expected really, because these things never go smooth. And because I had no, because the lace I'm using for this is actually curtain lace. It works just as well in dressmaking, but it is quite sturdy, quite a bit more sturdy and thicker, so there's no movement in it whatsoever, which is great if you're doing something else, not necessarily if you're using a jersey. So yeah, essentially the process is the same for both shirts. So you start by sewing together the shoulders, and again, because I've got net at the top here, I'm just doing a straight stitch to join them, and then trimming back with pinking shears because this stuff frays like crazy, and then laying my bit of organza style ribbon along that seam, so opening it up and laying the ribbon along and then sewing in with a zigzag, which is visible on both of these, but I think it kind of brings the homemadeness back to these. So yeah, so that is the top part. You do the shoulders first and then work your way down the sides. To kind of resist the temptation to pull things and get them too tight and then over tight, I'd lay things half onto the table, so that I've got most of the weight of the fabric is off the table, which can be aggravating, but in this case you do that and then put a long ruler on top, and it just holds everything stable whilst you layer things up and then pin on your bit of supporting whatever you want to use. Again, if I had an overlocker, this would be relatively simple. Overlockers, because you've got 2 or 3 needles moving, they bind the edge, trim the edge and make the seam at the same time, which is great, but I don't have one of them. So for the side seams I used a little bit of reinforcement again and did a zigzag stitch and then a straight stitch, because I don't want them to be really flexible really, and it's just going to sit comfortably together. So the zigzag stitch essentially holds things in, and then you put the straight stitch on to just bind everything together. And moving out, using about a 2 or 3 millimeters length of a stitch is fine. If you're particularly concerned about it and you want to kind of recreate the overlocker look, you can go back over the zigzag stitch once or twice more just to add the extra bit of strength, but I don't think I need it with the added ribbon here. So yeah, for the white shirt I doubled up on the lace to give it more of a coverage on the front, because being white it's fairly see-through, and if I'm wearing white undercrackers then it's quite visible, you can really see the line, particularly on this stuff. So adding the extra bit of ribbon on, or not ribbon, bit of net on, it certainly covers up as much as you want to cover. And if you're a person who goes around without wearing foundation garments of that kind, then that will obviously help you to conceal things that may pop out if it gets a bit cold. So yeah, with the white shirt, the only difference really was that I put on a strip of the lace along the bottom edge as well. That kind of finishes it off. I think the white one looks better with that. I'm not sure if the red one would have looked better, because the ribbon I had is a two-sided, it's a symmetrical ribbon, and if I tried to fold that over and create an edge with it, I don't think that would have worked. Whereas the other one, because it's only got kind of a single drop to it, being curtain lace, I think it looks better. The edge for the sleeves, where I've got the join, I've put in a strip of ribbon just to tidy that up, because it did look a little messy where the edge of the lace is tucking up underneath the net. It's really quite visible, and all the way around these I've come along and just tack stitched the raw edge of the fabric just down towards the jersey, so it's not showing anywhere around. So yeah, and the kind of final process of these was binding on the collar, which I debated over what I was going to do. I've got a little bit of bias binding in the cupboard somewhere, but I didn't have any that really matched the colours that I wanted. So for the red shirt, I've used actually a piece of the jersey to do it with, and I've used some ribbon on the white one. The ribbon really does show quite a bit, because the white shirt, the white fabric isn't quite white, it's a little bit off-white, so that kind of white edge really does pop out quite a bit. I hope that with a couple of washes that might even out slightly. If not, then I'll probably do something with some dye or something just to kind of tone down that colour, because that white edge really does kind of pop a bit too much. So yeah, basically used a normal binding process where you lay down your strip of binding with front faces together, and then sew along one edge, and then fold it up and over itself, and then sew along it again. Now for the red one, because I used jersey, it stretched and it warped. I should have done that sewing by hand, but didn't feel like it at the end of a 6-hour session. So I'm gonna pay for that. It should level itself out after a wash or two, but if it doesn't, if it really looks bad, I will actually unpick it and redo it with bias binding, I think, because that'll look better. So yeah, once you've got your main body done, you can then drop your sleeves in. Now there are different ways of doing this and ways of kind of gathering the fabric so it looks neat. Because this was a handmade pattern, I know there's going to be some variation on the sleeve length, so I'm expecting there to be a bit of a pleat or something just coming up. I've already sewn together the bottom edge of the sleeves before I do this bit, which is probably a bad idea, but I prefer to work this way anyway. So I line up that seam with the side seam of the shirt, and then work up one side to the middle and then the other side to the middle, so you're working up towards the top of the shoulder. And then whatever fabric you've got excuse me, whatever fabric you've got left, you can just kind of tease out and kind of pleat in. So I've created a small little tuck pleat at the top of each of the shoulders, which is only maybe half an inch or so of fabric, so it doesn't affect the line so much. It's just kind of tucked away. If it was anything more substantial, then you might need to rethink your pattern slightly, but about half an inch you can tuck away and it doesn't look too bad. So yeah, in terms of the fit and the comfort of these, the net fabric is a little scratchy. I've actually gone in and doubled over and did kind of a French seam essentially, and folded in the net so it sits against itself, so you don't have the raw edges poking out, which is okay. In future I wouldn't use this fabric because it's not ideal for this kind of thing, particularly on the red one, which is quite is a very plasticky net and it kind of feels a little scratchy, but after a while you don't feel it, so it's not that big of a problem. So yeah, I think I'm pretty much there with these. I'm not entirely satisfied, but considering I haven't done any kind of jersey work like this for a very long time, and I'm not using an overlocker or double needle or anything like that, they came out really well. So yeah, excuse any funny sounds. I'm going to change into the other one just to show that off for the end of the video. I will not be showing this bit because no one wants to see this. So now these are both made and finished to okay kind of standard. I know where I've gone wrong, I know where I can develop my skills for future reference. When I can get the money together to get myself an overlocker, I might well do that, or I might just invest in a couple of double needles and go that way instead. So those are the options for future reference. So generally using your own items for your own wardrobe to make patterns is a really good idea, because you know they've come out of your wardrobe and they fit you perfectly. And if you're anything like me, you probably would have already adapted them to suit you, because there's such a variation in plus size measurements that you can buy a size 24 from 2 or 3 different shops and find there are 2 or 3 inches of difference all the way through the garment. So I've got into the habit of basically readjusting everything I buy, because there's a pretty good chance that they're not going to fit. You know, last time I was sorting out stuff for interviews and things like that, I bought maybe half a dozen shirts and none of them fitted. They were all my size, but not one of them fitted comfortably. So they all needed some form of adjustment. And if you can learn how to do that part of the craft, and that opens the doors to anything else, anything more complicated. So something like this isn't particularly complicated. It's only a 3-part pattern. So it's front, back and sleeves. And once you've mastered that, even in something like jersey, which is notoriously difficult, then you can pretty much go forward to any kind of fabric, any kind of garment. I do suggest you find yourself a couple of pattern working books and that kind of thing. And most patterns these days have the instructions written on them, or at least on the back, so you've got some idea of how things fit together. But being able to make your own from the items you know are wearable, that's infinitely usable, really. And the way the world's going these days, if we do go to zombie apocalypse, then if you're not a fighter, if you're not a farmer, then someone who can make decent clothes that fit comfortably for long periods of time is probably quite useful. So let's stand up and show you this one. So here I've got the ribbon lace trim on the bottom here, which, because it's got no stretch to it, I've left the sides open so there's a bit of stretch here if I need it, but I don't really. This is perhaps a little bit too loose, I think. Might need to take that in slightly, but considering it's jersey, it's going to stretch a little bit over time, so I might need to do some adjustment anyway, but that's something for later on. So I've got a somewhat visible tattoo on the back here. The idea of this essentially was to make it visible for make my tattoo completely visible, but I didn't go quite far enough down with the lace, I don't think. So yeah, this is how I made a couple of jersey t-shirts. It took me most of a day to do, but I think if I'd have attempted a pattern, a proper pattern, it would have taken me at least 2 days, because I didn't know where the pieces go. But this was just quite a simple, as again, 3-part pattern. The only difficulty I had was in rethinking this, because I ran out of fabric. So be prepared to rethink your plans, be prepared to have a moment of thought. And you might get something that's quite interesting. Now, I'm not entirely sure these are me, but I like them nonetheless. I'm probably not going to wear them out because I think they're a little bit too excessive, but for coming around the house, they're fine. So yeah, that is how I make t-shirts, and I'll see you again next week.